Hey everybody, and welcome to week 16 of class. We are getting close to the end, just a few more weeks, and then you get summer break. So this week we are going to be assessing a really significant moment in history, one that was really in the making from even before the time that the Civil War was in place, if you really want to stretch it back, and that is the Civil Rights Movement. And it's actually probably best to think of it as kind of a civil rights movements. There was multiple movements that took place in the 50s and 60s and 70s that did not necessarily have to do with African Americans. However, what I will argue is that the African American experience and their struggle for civil liberties and civil rights really fostered other forms. And so you see in California, for example, a gay rights movement, the LGBTQ community begins to develop. Japanese Americans as well, Mexicans, women, second wave feminism. You see a whole growth of movements that really were empowered by the African American civil rights movement. So we are going to be focusing on two of these this week, predominantly the African American experience, and we're going to sort of be reassessing this period, but then we'll also briefly take a look at second wave feminism and liberal feminists versus radical feminists and what have you. But the traditional narrative about the civil rights movement was that it began in the 1950s with Rosa Parks. She doesn't give up her seat on the bus. This starts a bus boycott. Martin Luther King Jr. comes in and segregation is attacked. Well, there is a text that came out a few years back called At the Dark End of the Street. And one of the arguments that she makes, Danielle McGuire, she is a white historian, and I think that's important for just for a question I'm going to raise here in a second, but she repitches the civil rights movement and makes an argument that civil rights movement did not begin because Rosa Parks just was tired one day. Rather, it started because, as she makes very clear, Rosa Parks had been fighting a movement against the rape of black women by white men in the South. Frequently, these white men never being brought to justice, and that in that moment when she gives up her seat on the bus, it's not because she's tired, it's because she's had enough. She's at that breaking point. And really, for this particular author, segregation was not the central theme that brought about the civil rights movement, but rather it was the right of black women to control their own bodies. And so it's an interesting repitching of the civil rights movement. I'm interested to know what you think. I'm going to have you take a look at some of her work. And then also I'm going to give you kind of the traditional narrative as well. And we'll talk about the bus boycott. We'll talk about Birmingham rather in 1963. We'll go through the Little Rock Nine, and we'll talk about Brown v. Board of Education, all the mainstays that you've probably heard before. But we kind of want to get our mind wrapped around the fact that the civil rights movement didn't just happen out of nothing, and it didn't just start in the 1950s. There had been a long history of abuse that preceded that. So that's what we're looking at this week. Obviously, you want to be working on that second PowerPoint. I believe that's due really, really soon, so make sure you know when that's coming up. Again, off the top of my head, I don't recall the exact due date, but it's in the syllabus and it's also in the online announcement. So that's what we got going on. If you have questions or comments, please contact me. Otherwise, as always, go in peace, be warm and filled. May the force be with you. Live long and prosper, and may the odds forever be in your favor. Have a blessed week, guys.